think I was probably 10 years old. My parents had sent me to Jewish Saturday school. I was in class, and the teacher decided, said to everyone, I'm going to try something different today. Everybody just push their desks out of the way, stand in the center of the room. And I want you to do this thought experiment with me. Pretend that you are in Nazi Germany, and the SS is coming door to door asking whether people are Jewish. And you have two options. You can deny your faith and live, or you can affirm your faith and be sent to the Holocaust and die. If you want to deny your faith, go to the left side of the room. If you want to affirm your faith, go to the right side. Right? And so, of course, all of the good Jewish boys and girls run over to the right side of the room. And I'm left staying in the middle with my friend. And we kind of look at each other and we walk over to the left side. And I think about this moment a lot lately. Because there is the social expectation to take sides. And that there's only two sides to things. And people understand instinctively that there's this pressure that they can apply to groups of people to make people conform. No one had to tell all those little kids what they needed to do. They all just knew exactly what they should say, right? That they repeated it. Oh, I would never deny my faith. I would be much better dying and going to heaven and never lying than, denying my religion. Like, they knew that was what the teacher wanted to hear. And I knew that they were all full of shit, right? That this whole thing was just this social performance. And that nobody really meant that, but they just knew that that's what they needed to do to get out of this particular situation. And it's so much easier to just know what you're supposed to say and duck underneath a question like that than it is to actually think about it and address it and answer it honestly. And looking back at that, it's like, I wasn't brave. I wasn't excited to stand up against authority. I was physically repulsed at that group dynamic. It was disgusting to me that people would do that. It was this very visceral experience. And, I think about that when there's so much talk about tribalism and how tribalism is just this inherent human capacity, that developed in terms of bonding groups together, and that it's in all of us. Tribalism, you just hear it all over the place. And just whatever biological hardware people have for tribalism, for whatever reason, it just didn't get put into me. And I think these same dynamics are playing out where in different spheres, right? In politics, in our subculture, where people are on these two sides. They were forced there by this kind of unnecessarily social imposition. And they don't particularly like where they're at. Like, if you look at the Democratic Party, progressives are not happy about its direction, right? They don't like Joe Biden. They don't like the older, more liberal ethos. More center-left Democrats aren't happy with progressives. Libertarians aren't happy with certain Trumpian Republicans. Free trade Republicans aren't happy. It's like nobody's happy. And it's like, well, that's just a part of coalitions. It's like you get groups of people, they don't agree on everything, and nobody's quite happy with what's going on. But why don't we see more fracturing? Why don't we see groups splitting up into more similar ideological committed people that would probably have, that would at least, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what that would get you. Like, what are the pluses and minuses of doing that? There are both. But why doesn't that happen? It doesn't happen mostly because of fear, right? Mostly because progressives fear that if they split off from more centrists, that would just cede Republicans' control, and vice versa. Classic argument of like, why vote third party? You're throwing your vote away. This is a particular calculus that people make in this type of decision making. And it keeps people in these groups that they don't particularly like to be in. And I see this in the art world today. I was just like a young weirdo who didn't fit in anywhere, didn't like groups, and I kind of ended up in the art community. Because that was a place where you could meet other fellow people who were rejected from all other parts of society. And you could sit down and have long, interesting conversations about a whole host of ideas, right? And you get to experience that mind-melding, talking all night with three people where you feel as if you've suddenly entered into this same brain where you're just like thinking through this idea in this incredible way. It's one of the most pleasurable experiences to me. And if you think that's not possible because of differing skin color or genitalia or sexual orientation, like, I just feel so sorry for you, because that is one of the more pleasurable experiences of being a human being for me. Maybe not, obviously not for everyone. But that's not what the art world is anymore. You've got to take a side. And the art world has an incredibly specific set of beliefs that you need to ascribe to. And if you don't ascribe to any one of that set of beliefs, you are a horrible person, and you will be a horrible person for the rest of your life, right? And like, if those are the requirements for being in a community, for staying on that side of the room, being in that group, like, what a horrible group to be in. Like, not only have they taken away some of the most pleasurable parts about communing with other people, but there's just this authoritarian, punishing element that lacks any tone of forgiveness and compassion. And it's scary for people to leave that space, because it's like, where else are you going to go? You don't want to go to the other side. You're on one side of the room. You don't want to go to the other side of the room. And nobody, like, apparently nobody's in the middle, right? And so it's a scary thing to walk away from that. But it's absolutely necessary, because given those options of existing in that type of environment, or thinking and expressing ideas that you find valuable, like, I'm going to choose the latter every single time. You know, sorry, there's just a lot to get to here. So this is all in reference to a article that I published on Instagram that caused a small controversy. I don't know how much I'm going to want to, you know, why don't we just go through the whole thing? But anyway, if you want to have context, I'll put links in this thread. It'll be linked to the Instagram thread. There'll be links to the articles that I wrote. You can read people's comments on the Instagram thread about the arguments they were making against what I said. And I'll post a link to something that was sent to me as kind of a counter argument as well. So all of this initially started with this artist, Peggy Nolan, who lived behind me. I used to live on the West Side a long time ago. And, you know, we were friendly. I thought she was a super creative person. I was always interested to see what she made. And she was working on this one project where she wanted to make dresses of her favorite talk show hosts. And it was going to be a whole series. I can't remember they were all women. From what I remember, it was the way she was thinking about it. It was just kind of a series of empowered women talk show hosts. And she had her favorites, which I cannot remember, but I'm going to say, you know, it was Sally Jesse Raphael, Ricky Lake, Oprah, that group of people. And she, I think just by chance, decided to make the Oprah dress first. And there was a picture of her that got taken. I think she just kind of, you know, like everyone does, just put stuff on the internet. And the reaction, there's an article that was written in Hyperallergic by Alicia Eller, which I'll also link to, that was titled something like, Peggy Nolan is a dumb, racist white woman. And that and her interpretation of the dress was that this was an example of a white woman exploiting a black body for her own profit. And connected that to the history of people doing that. And just said it was a totally racist image. Excuse me. And that is a perfectly valid interpretation. But that's one interpretation, right? And that's not the only way to see it, right? Like, Peggy didn't see it that way. She had her own view. That's another view. Like, neither of those cancel each other out. Now you have two ways of looking at that object, right? And it'd probably be pretty easy to come up with a third and a fourth. But increasingly, and I kind of watched this trend play out, the argument became, I've had this interpretation of it, And it has caused me pain. And because of that, this object can no longer exist, either in public space or in the world, right? So like the conclusion of this argument happened with this Emmett Till painting, there was a white woman who painted a painting of Emmett Till, who was unfairly and horribly killed and mutilated. He was a black man. And people petitioned for that painting to be destroyed. Like, not taken down from the gallery, not for this person to be punished for being culturally insensitive. They wanted that painting physically destroyed, right? And once you get to that point of the argument, like, that's problematic, to use a word that everyone should be familiar with. And so the move that's made here is that if I interpret an image in a certain way, if I interpret this image as exploiting people of color and being hurtful and an image of violence, the next move that is almost always applied is to tie that to an entire group of people. So to say that the black community is upset at this image or disapproves of this image or interprets this image in a certain way, right? Or people of color are hurt by this image. There are 40 million black people in the United States. And I think one of the differences here of opinion is that people that have criticized my point of view, they think of those 40 million people as more homogenous. They just assume that they have all taken the perspective that just one perspective that they outline. And I just imagine that a group of 40 million people, even who have a history of overcoming oppression and have a community together, are going to be more intellectually and interpretively diverse. I mean, I wish there was some kind of study you could do, right? I mean, there is. It's like, show people images. What is your interpretation? Take samples. It's like, because one of the criticisms, which is apt, is that there's hardly any black people in the Kansas City art community. And for institutions within that community that have talked endlessly about inclusion and diversity and have seemingly not made it any less white for literally my entire time in the Kansas City art community, like, it's not that they might not be trying, but man, you gotta pull some other levers. Like, maybe you should actually have a larger subset of black people or people of color give their interpretive analysis of this image instead of, being a white progressive person and just assuming all of these people think the same thing. So this was all brought up again. This happened, God, I'm terrible at time, but I want to say 8 or 10 years ago. And this all got brought up again when this gallery in Kansas City, Front Space, kind of published this post that was kind of a call out to this photographer, Jamie Warren, who appeared in a photo dressed like her. She did a whole series of photos of her favorite musicians, and some of them were black, right? Sorry, somebody just tried to call me. So Peggy's thing got tacked on to this Jamie thing. It was kind of like, oh yeah, also remember this time that Peggy Nolan made this horribly racist dress? And so this brought this whole thing back up again. And it also brought in blackface as part of this conversation. And my original arguments had nothing to do with blackface, right? I wrote 2 different articles about this. It wasn't a part of it. And I hadn't really thought that much about it. But because they were coupled together, there was some confusion about about what images I was talking about, or whether I was defending it, or this or that. So let me just take the time to try to go through that argument, because I've thought about it now, and I have opinions. Blackface was a particular thing that happened in American history where incredibly racist white people painted their faces and acted out horrible stereotypes to make black people seem dumb for the amusement of other white people. And that this was the most popular form of entertainment in America for years. What a fucked up thing. It's so fucked up that I don't really want to extend that word to mean other things. Like blackface, that was a horrible thing that happened. But today, the word has been extended, right? It pretty much means any person who darkens their skin in any way, in any culture, for any reason. And that is now called blackface or brownface. And I understand that move, that linguistic move. Language is flexible. You can change the meanings of words. You can add more things in there if you want. And I think the overarching sentiment is you take a super powerful word that has impact and you put more and more stuff in there so you can call people's attention to what you think is an important social problem that needs to be addressed. Like, I totally get why people are doing that. But it's worth thinking through some of these distinctions, right? 'Cause there is a movie called Pharaoh that was made in communist Poland, I think in the 80s. And it was Polish people dressing up like Egyptians, right? And it was this big picture. It's historical fiction. And you got Polish people in brown makeup with absolutely no intention of making Egyptians seem less than in any way, right? And then you've got, I remember watching this Bollywood movie, and of course in Bollywood movies, every 5 minutes there's another song, and in this particular song, they'd obviously just watched a Madonna music video and tried to recreate it. And so they had Indian men painting their faces black, dancing around in the background with somebody dressed up that looks like Madonna, right? And then you have Jamie Warren's photo, which is kind of this, Jamie dressed up as Stevie Wonder, and it's just like a good example of this early 2000s weirdo chic New York thing that was going on. Like, is it in good taste? No. But it does describe a particular thing that was happening in that in that time. So the distinctions here, I think, are important. Like, making fun of somebody, making fun of an entire race of people for other people's amusement is bad, right? Like, you could think that everything I laid out, all those distinctions are bad, right? But they are at least different levels of bad that would then correspond to different levels of social punishment, right? And what happens is, no, these are all just blackface, and blackface is horribly racist, and it's all just horribly racist. And anyone who takes the time that I just did to make distinctions in this particular era of social unrest and racial strife is equivocating and a horrible person because they don't just go to one side of the room and morally condemn the act. And that's what needs to happen, right? And so anyone who doesn't go, anyone who stands in the middle and is like, well, let's think about this. What are some important distinctions to make before we appoint ourselves the moral arbiter of justice? People are unhappy with that. This happened. There's Katie Herzog. It used to be a writer for The Stranger. When the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing exploded, and everyone was calling him a pedophile, she wrote this article that basically laid out the scientific distinctions for sexual orientation and how pedophile was for people attracted to prepubescent people, and there's a word for post-pubescent, and there's a word for just young women. And right, for her, this distinction was important. She got dragged so hard for doing this. And the arguments that came back were essentially something like, why are you endorsing pedophilia? Right? It's just like, people don't like people that make distinctions for some reason. But they're important. You'll have to explain to me how you can appoint yourself the arbiter of moral justice, and then also in the same breath say that these distinctions don't matter. So the other accusation that happened in this debate was people said that I am being too rational or logical. I was using like academic language and discourse, and that I lacked empathy for people of color or Black people. And because I've never kind of had the lived experience of that kind of suffering, that I wasn't appropriately valuing the pain that these images cause. The argument would be like, well, why do you care about Peggy's pain over the pain that is caused from the image, right? It's a really complex thing to think about. Like, in my mind, if a Black artist, like Andre Serrano, made The Piss Christ, which made white people horribly upset, right? Like, too bad. You've got one interpretation of that image. Guess what? There's many of them. And some of them are not demeaning to the life of Jesus Christ, right? Like, you can think of that image as demeaning, like you are putting a substance piss and Jesus together. And like, how could that possibly not be demeaning? Well, if you think of urine symbolically, and you think of what the body does to get rid of the toxins or the excess, you can make some pretty interesting analogies to, some of the value that Christianity gives to people, right? So I'm pretty much always going to be on the side of the artist here, and their skin color seems irrelevant. I know that's a terrible thing to say in any particular situation, but when you think about things through these ideals, those are the conclusions you have to come to. And this was another argument that was leveled at me, which was that academia and logic and rationality are somehow the tools of white people. And that people of color are so oppressed and marginalized that all they can do is have emotional reactions. And why prioritize your logic over their emotional reaction to something? And it's just like, what a deeply racist and demeaning depiction of people of color. Like, all of the contributions that they have made to academia, to literature and poetry, to science, to great speeches and leaders, and all of those people did it in the most extreme circumstances of being so oppressed, and transcending the oppression to make something beautiful and helpful to other people, right? That just can't be your argument. You cannot think that people get a pass on reason and logic because of their skin color. Like, come on. And if I'm misrepresenting that point of view, like, please show me where I am. I'm genuinely interested for someone to give a better articulation of that point of view. I guess the last thing I'll mention in relationship to the idea of my point of view is skewed because I've never experienced Black suffering. My best friend, his name was John. He was an older Black man. I can tell you a lot of stories. He's incredibly intelligent, had a lot of problems, and found himself in jail, probably for something he didn't do. And while he was in jail, he got sick. And they ran some tests on him. And they found out that he had this rare form of leukemia. And so instead of treating him, they released him from jail so he could die in the street. And he went back to this house over on the east side, and I go and visit him. And I watched him die. No electricity. Had to run an extension cord from house to house just to get a light on in a room. Water was shut off. Had to fill up a tub with the neighbor's hose so you could flush the toilet. And we'd sit together and we'd talk. And he was a drug addict. And I'd get so mad at him because he would go to chemo, because the University of Kansas did take his case on for some kind of specialty trial. He'd go to chemo and he'd get out and go straight to the bar and do drugs and drink all night long. And did that pretty much till the day he died. And I'd get so mad at him that he wasn't taking better care of himself. But what I didn't understand was that this is how he wanted to live. And it's like, he made up his mind that I am gonna live my life exactly how I want to live it up until the day I die. And he did. And what does my experience with John tell me about Black people? Nothing. Almost nothing. Because he is a single individual. And you cannot extrapolate the experience of one person to 40 million people. Human beings are complex. They're confusing. You can know them for years and never get close to understanding them. Anyway, I guess I'll end this by saying that it's difficult to leave a group and wander into the wilderness because, you're unsure of what's out there. But I know for sure I can't exist in an ideologically conformist space. And so there was almost no decision in my mind about what I needed to do. And I invite other people who are tired of living in that kind of group dynamic. Once you stand up, say what you believe, articulate it, and kind of the wave of outrage crashes over you, and that all ends. And all of those people who were very periphery in your life, and they all fade away. What you are left with is a better group of people who are more nuanced thinkers, who actually are interested in discussing these ideas. And that is a way forward, because these people are hard to find, right? And it's really only through these kind of processes that you can identify each other, right? The art world used to be a way to identify these people, and that's seemingly no longer true. And so the internet has given us the option of finding each other in another way, right? This is a group of people I finally feel like I could be a part of. I don't know though. I'm still not a huge fan of belonging. Anyway, I know this was long. If you made it through, thank you for listening. If you're interested in contacting me, I love nothing more than clarifying things that I said. If things I said were unclear, please let me know. I'll try to talk it through with you. So maybe we'll talk soon.